Hello guys, welcome back to Ancient Literature. Okay, so I want you to watch this video before taking your last quiz. And the quiz is going to be a little different, so you basically need to get to the end of this video to hear me explain what you need to do for this quiz. All right, guys. Quick thing. Obviously, I was having some technical issues at the end of last video. This was a slide that I was missing that I wanted to show you. Uh, Camilla, after she dies, she inspires all of the women in Latium to start fending off the city themselves, which is more than the Trojans can say for their population of like mothers and people who are not there at all, right? As far as we know, the Trojans are at this point, the Trojans in Italy, they're like just dudes. They left all the women and children back in Sicily. So even mothers up on the ramparts strive. Their genuine love of country, that's going to be relevant to what we talk about today, marks the way. They'd seen Camilla fight. They hurl their weapons with trembling hands, daring to do the work of iron with pikes of rugged oak and poles charred hard, defending their city walls. They all burned to be the first to die. It's kind of crazy. Camilla really riled them up and inspired them a lot. And again, this is I don't know. It just kind of makes Camilla seem more endearing. Uh, and Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's kind of interesting because, like we talk about, the Rutulians are more a clear-cut villain in this poem than the Trojans were the bad guys of Iliad. Um, so this kind of ambiguity, which is just a fancy word for like, there's not so much a black and white all the time going on in these poems. That's not new to epic poetry. Homer definitely did that too, right? In Iliad, it was really hard to tell if we were supposed to like the Greeks or the Trojans better, and probably the only reason that we actually approach it expecting to like one side better is because in like modern entertainment, big action movies, there's usually always a very clear cut protagonist. Um, and it was more complex and complicated in Iliad. Initially, in this poem, it seemed like it was a little more clear cut, where it was like, yeah, we're definitely obviously rooting for Aeneas and the Trojans, but then someone like Camilla comes around and she seems like really cool, and it's a little confusing. Okay, we have the rest of the student responses. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this reminds me. If you gave like turned in your poem, and you were okay with me sharing it, and you have not seen me share it, um, let's see. Then you should send it again, maybe. Because I was asking for it in so many different Google Forms, I think there might have been one or two that got lost. So anyway, I just want you to know that like I'm not choosing not to share your poem if you're willing for me to share it. I do have one more poem to share on Monday, so that's fun. Um, yeah, okay, let's go through these student responses. I believe that Turnus will die because of his decision not to stop fighting. Aeneas will then spare Latinus because of the pleadings of Lavinia. Latinus will give Aeneas his kingdom in gratitude for his life. And that sounds, yeah, like I could see that. Like Turnus, the quote unquote bad guy, will die, but Aeneas will still be able to have some peaceful resolution with Latinus and Lavinia, who's supposed to be his wife. Yeah, I could see that. I think one of the main things that will happen at the end is Turnus and Aeneas will fight. Yeah, that seems like it's probably going to happen. However, the king will probably not want this battle to go on. Interesting. I also think that before the battle, something will go wrong. Either Aeneas or Turnus will get hurt, but later return to battle. The last thing I think will happen is the battle. Someone, a god or soldier or something, will interfere with the battle. I feel like this person is 100% correct because I just read the first like 10 pages or so, and I'm not saying all of this happens, but yeah, good estimation there. I honestly have no clue how I was going to end. Guessing here. Aeneas and the Trojans end up wintering in Carthage, and he and Dido become a thing. Oh, I wish. I want some fan fiction where uh, Aeneas goes back to Carthage, but are you kind of forgetting that Dido, she's not alive anymore. So unless there was some weird like trickery where she came back to life, which surprisingly doesn't happen a ton in Greco-Roman myth. It did happen to Sarpedon. Okay, I think that Aeneas will die probably. They will still be okay without Aeneas though. Ooh, interesting. Also, I'm super bored. I wish we could go back to school. Fair. I think everyone is getting there, but it's looking like the end of May or like middle of May. We're gonna start to maybe have some opportunities where I don't know about school, but anyway, I feel you there. I think we're in kind of the home stretch. I believe that Turnus will continue to fight and Aeneas will win in the war and marry Lavinia. Yeah, that would kind of be the happy ending, right? Like the kind of like most straightforward happy ending, quote unquote happy ending, is basically that Aeneas wins and marries Lavinia. That's what he's supposed to do. Aeneas will defeat the Latins and settle down. He says he will bury all who died if he wins, but I believe he won't. That's interesting. Are you saying like he's not going to bury or respect the dead Rutulians? Because that would be kind of rude. I hope he would at least bury his own men. I do think that this war could end peacefully instead of one side wiping the other one out. I think the other two sides could coexist in the same way. I wish, right? It doesn't feel like a lot of characters in the book want that to happen, and it's just like Aeneas and Turnus who are still kind of dead set on fighting, or more so Turnus. But kind of Aeneas too, as it is already apparent that both sides have regrets. Yeah, exactly. Aeneas will most likely clash with Turnus and his army. Aeneas will probably win, and that'll be it. Interesting. Yeah, that's it kind of goes back to what our more straightforward expectation is. I think it'll conclude in kind of a happy ending. That will most likely not happen, so I hope it'll be a questioning end. Interesting, very interesting. Okay, guys, this is kind of exciting. I get to unveil something now a little bit that I have been holding off on talking about because I wanted you guys just to go into this poem as somewhat of a blank slate. Obviously, I wanted you to know about like some of the basics of Roman history, but I didn't want to talk about this thing that has come up in the past less than 100 years in terms of scholarship on Virgil and Aeneid. Meaning, this is something that certain college professors and researchers and writers have really just kind of made into a thing in the past century. It happened in the 20th century that dot dot dot. I'll get to it on the next slide. But my question here is: Virgil low key subversive? Um, okay, so what is subversion? Um, let's see. It comes from this Latin verb subvertere, which means to overthrow. So it refers to a process by which the values and principles of a system in place are contradicted or reversed, an attempt to transform the established social order and its structures of power, authority, hierarchy, social norms. Okay, there's a little bit of a jargon in there, but hopefully you kind of get what it's saying. It's kind of I mean literally it's kind of like overthrowing, but in a intellectual way, not like actually going to war with an idea. This is about taking an idea and kind of flipping it, um, taking somebody's expectation for something, which I was just talking about what our expectations for the ending was, and flipping it a little bit. That's what subversion is. It's a word that gets way overused by movie critics and like YouTubers who talk about movies. Everyone made a big deal about the what was it? The Last Jedi, the second of the new Star Wars movies, how subversive it was when Luke Skywalker just tosses the lightsaber. Like it's that big epic moment at the end of the first one where Rey like tries to give him his lightsaber, and you all think it's going to be like this big moment where he's like, "Oh my gosh, like you're actually my daughter, and like thanks for the lightsaber, not going to train you now." Instead, he just like takes it and he just like tosses it off the hill. That was, I think we could say that is subversive. It upended our expectations. It took our expectations and just threw it out the window and said, you know what, we're going to do something different. So that's an example in popular entertainment. And sorry for those who have not seen The Last Jedi and don't really know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so it's basically just like a surprising element. And there's more to it than that. But okay. So in the 20th century, this is what I'm building up to, is that scholars started to wonder if there was actually a little more going on in the Aeneid than we previously had thought for about almost 2,000 years. Um, so for 2,000 years up to that point, people thought that Aeneid was like, pro-Roman and liked Rome and liked Augustus and was just kind of like all about Roman identity and patriotism. But like I said, in the middle of the last century, we had some um, scholars start to question that and say, like, is that really what's going on here? Um, so they started to, this is the note, they started to see it not as clear cut pro Roman propaganda, which let me define propaganda on the next slide, but instead as actually subtly critical of Augustan Rome, meaning actually it was like kind of like almost secretly or like very subtly and underhandedly or subversively critiquing and um, what's the word? Kind of like complaining about Rome. We need propaganda. We need that definition in case you don't know what you probably heard that word, but you might not know exactly what it means. Maybe it has come up in history. But so this is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. So that's kind of like a fancy way of just saying propaganda is information that is promoting it something specific, a certain idea. Um, it's not this like unbiased thing. So an example of that is Uncle Sam. He's straight up propaganda. So propaganda can be good or bad. It doesn't have to be bad. Sometimes it's bad. Obviously, in a setting like Nazi Germany, getting people excited about the Nazi Party, that's really bad propaganda. But something like Uncle Sam, that's not really. There's nothing necessarily bad about that. It's using aesthetics and imagery and pageantry in the form of like this character design that is Uncle Sam to get people revved up about their country. So usually it's information that is for or against a certain country. Um, okay, yeah. So to add to that, it's often going hand in hand with nationalism. We talked about nationalism a little bit the very beginning of Aeneid when we were getting some like background on Roman history. And this is just identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. So it's just like it's putting your country first, which for us nowadays in the 21st century, that's kind of like a it's like, yeah, duh. Like, why wouldn't you put your country first? And it's weird to look into this because scholars claim that this is like a relatively new thing. I would probably argue against that a little bit, that it's been around since at least ancient Rome, as I'll get to. But it is something that started to spike in the 18th century. You might be wondering, I mean, so nationalism is kind of it's similar to patriotism, right? We all know what patriotism is. Um, but yeah, you might be thinking like I was kind of thinking when I was looking over this, like, it's like hasn't nationalism happened throughout all of human history? Every time a nation or territory goes to war with another territory, they're being kind of nationalistic. They're trying to protect themselves. But to kind of maybe hopefully clarify it, look at this example on the bottom right, and then we'll move to the one on the left. This is when an individual begins to identify with the larger nation as opposed to the smaller individualized town or tribe or even like family. So that is something that wasn't necessarily happening thousands of years ago. People were more interested in like this is my little tribe, this is my little smaller unit, and that's who I protect. This is who I care about. To when we start getting more successful like empires, like the Roman Empire, that's when you start having people start to think of the nation as this concept, this imaginary country that exists in their head. I mean, it's a real country, right? Rome was like this actual territory, it's physical, but it starts to take on all these ideas, especially around the time that Augustus is in charge of Rome. And so relevant to this is the fact that Virgil, if you remember, is from this little town in Mantua, uh, and he didn't even have Roman citizenship initially. And we've talked about how, like, you guys, if you're from Colorado, you probably have an allegiance to Colorado. But as Americans, we all also think of ourselves very much as Americans, and that might seem so obvious and like that would always be the case. But according to this the way of looking at things like that, that's not always something that was happening. Lower left is one more example, and we'll kind of move on. So, due to the Industrial Revolution, which was 200 years less than 200 years ago, there was an emergence of an integrated nation-encompassing economy and a national public sphere where the British people began to identify with the country at large rather than the smaller units of their province, town, or family. So that's just a more like historically specific instance of nationalism. Because yeah, like I said, critics they say that this is something that happened. This is like a 200-year-old concept, but scholars who look at ancient Rome. I think they are in somewhat agreement that this is happening under Augustus, which is the emperor that Virgil is essentially writing this poem for in some ways. Okay, I see that little note is cut off down there, but that's just the same as that one. So, okay, so to get to this actual school of thought to talk specifically about this, we had to get all these little definitions going. So optimists, that's basically what it's the word that we use for the viewpoint that has existed since literally the Aeneid was first composed 2,000 years ago, and they maintain that Aeneid is generally, if not strongly, nationalistic, patriotic, and pro-Rome. I mean, right? Like that's the obvious take that Virgil loves Rome. He thinks it's great, and he's writing this poem for Rome and like to honor Rome, and to give them this founding epic. But these pessimists, these new kids on the block, about 70-ish years ago, started to say that Aeneid is subtly critical of Augustan Rome, um, meaning that this is basically like anti-propaganda. And I have this little quote box because like this is what this would mean for Virgil and the poem, is that he wanted to secretly betray his patron, who was Augustus, but like no one knew about it for 2,000 years. Like it took 2,000 years for readers and scholars of the poem to say, oh wait, is he actually kind of like not making fun of Augustus in Rome, but pointing out things that are bad about it. Like, could that be what is going on? And this is kind of an interesting thing. If you when you go to college, whatever field you're in, things even within fields of like science, there are certain uh, areas of any given field where there's like controversy and there's argument and there's people who are on one side and people on the other side, for things that are like unproven or for ideas that are kind of new, and so these different schools of thought will clash. And if you go to like any given college university campus will have professors who are like, yeah, actually, I subscribe to the pessimistic view. I think Aeneid is critical of Rome, actually, in a kind of like secret, subtle way. And then other people are just like, no, like it's pro-Roman. Subversion was barely like subversion in this way was not even really a thing 2,000 years ago. I'm saying that's what they would say. But anyway, okay, I have a couple more notes, and then we'll actually get to the plot of this book 12. But hopefully this is like kind of interesting to you guys, because I could have told you guys at the very beginning of the poem that like, hey, like recently scholars have started to think maybe this poem is making fun of Rome. But I wanted you guys to approach it without that in your head, and to see where you guys feel, uh, you know, like I don't know. That way you could form your own opinion, is what I'm trying to say. So, okay, let me go through these notes. We should keep in mind that Virgil is heavily influenced by Homer, and both of them very clearly share this idea in their poems that war is bad, right? War equals bad. To be really reductive about it, it's very clear that Homer, even though he was alive 3,000 years ago, already had this kind of pacifist idea where even though he was writing a poem about war, he was very much having characters voice this sentiment and kind of and having different scenes shed light on this. I mean, like the whole thing between Priam and Achilles, I think is supposed to make us realize the futility of war and why, all of man should be brothers and not have these horrible conflicts, because at the end of the day, it's bad. And yeah, so Virgil obviously is doing that too. But does that mean that Virgil is also saying that Rome is bad? Because Rome goes to war with people and because Rome started off with Trojans invading the peninsula, does that also mean that Virgil thinks that Rome is bad? Can war be bad while Rome is also good? Are those things mutually exclusive? Um, and then, yeah, the other thing I mentioned is that Virgil is not from the city Rome. He's from Mantua, far to the north. And his people didn't even have citizenship until pretty recently, before the composition of this poem. Okay. So yeah, I have thoughts on this as a reader, like not so much as a teacher, but as like a reader. But I'm gonna hold off on sharing them, and on Monday we'll look at some of the reasons we could pull from the poem to say, yeah, maybe Virgil is actually critiquing Rome, and he's doing it in a subtle enough way where I guess Augustus wouldn't have picked up on it, right? I mean, Augustus was one of the first people to read it, and if it was like very clearly making fun of Rome, he would have been like, he would have hated it. He would have had it burned or something, presumably. Um, Augustus was really interested in Aeneid for the purposes of propaganda. Like we know that. So it would have had to have been secret enough, or subtle enough, rather, to basically go over Augustus's head. So yeah, is Virgil capable of that, and would he have wanted that? Maybe. That would be incentive for him to make it so subtle that it wouldn't have gotten him exiled or thrown into jail. All right, guys, we'll come back to that in a second, and we will talk about it more next week. But let me just blast through these slides real quick. There's probably like one note in the rest of these I'm just going over the first 10 pages of the book. So at the beginning of the book, there's like a pause in the fighting, and Turnus and King Latinus have this meeting that got interrupted last book. Basically, in this first text box, which I'm numbering now since I can't point to them, it took me too long to realize I should do that. But so let's see. Okay. This first text box isn't super important. It's just Latinus saying that he was never supposed to promise his daughter's hand to a native Italian. We've heard now a couple times about this random prophecy that the gods said that for me to this is the middle of it. For me to unite my daughter with any of the former suitors would have been wrong, forbidden. All the gods and prophets made that plain. Yeah, that she wasn't supposed to marry like a native Italian. Just like Aeneas isn't supposed to marry a Trojan, he's supposed to marry a native Italian, which is convenient. And then he's going on. He's like, "This is all really bad." In the second text box. And then Turnus starts kind of shouting back at him, and Turnus has this idea that they're going to form this pact. So let's see. Yeah, let's read most of this third text box. I'll take him on. Bring on the sacred rites, father. He's already calling him dad. He already thinks he's his father-in-law. Draft our binding terms. Either my right arm will send that Dardan down to heck, that rank deserter of Asia. My armies can sit back and watch, and Turnus' sword alone will rebut the charge of cowardice. Or, that was long-winded, let him reign over those he's beaten down. Let Lavinia go to him. So he's saying, yeah, let's kind of hold off on the fighting, because it's a little senseless at this point, and let's just decide it handily with a duel. Okay, does this remind you guys of anything from Iliad? It's very much book 3 of Iliad. Helen on the walls of Troy, watching her two husbands fight. It didn't actually end up settling things, so we'll see how this works. And then Amata, she's like crying, and she really likes Turnus. If you remember, she was originally the one to get fired up by Alecto the Fury. And I don't know if there's still kind of like Alecto trickery going on, but she really wants Turnus to be her son-in-law. She's a fan, whereas Latinus, obviously, he seemed a little more open to Aeneas to begin with, and is now saying that he regrets ever promising Turnus' hand. Okay, a little more. Juturnia. She's been mentioned a couple times. She's done these minor things, including she teleported Turnus away from the battle at one point. Juturnia's kind of interesting. She's this like minor goddess nymph in a few places in Italy. She's kind of what we call a local goddess, in that she didn't have a huge cult following throughout Italy or the Roman world, but there was like a few towns throughout Italy where people would pay respect and do various rites for this goddess, who is just a goddess of fountains. Okay, that's her as a fountain, as a statue. I couldn't find too many pictures of her, and that's also some ruins of a temple she had somewhere in Italy. So she is favored by Juno. Juno likes her. And her name basically is just a combination of Turnus and Juno. Virgil makes her the sister of Turnus. She, like, before this, like, Juturnia was a thing, but Turnus wasn't. And so Virgil is deciding to make Turnus this character who happens to be related to Juturnia, who presumably originally was immortal, and she gets turned into a nymph. Anyway, Juno goes to her and she's like, "Hey, you gotta do some stuff. They're about to be a duel, and it looks like Juno doesn't actually want this duel to happen. Maybe she's not super confident in her boy Turnus." Also, while this is happening, Latinus goes to Aeneas in his camp, and they agree to the pact. I probably don't need to read this, but Aeneas just agrees to it. He's like, yeah, like if I win, we will then have peace. That's the important thing, is that like if Aeneas wins, they're going to stop the fighting. Aeneas will kind of blend with the Latian people, and he will respect their gods. And so he's saying all of that. He's being very pious, basically. Yeah. And if they lose, that is kind of interesting. It's in the middle of the first text box. If by chance the victory goes to the Latin, Turnus, we agree the defeated will depart to Evander's. So he's saying, like, we're going to go back to Evander's town. That old king guy who they went to and has been helping them out. He's like, we'll just go there. We'll live there. Iulus, my son, will leave this land, and Aeneas' Trojans will revert in times to come, take up arms again, and threaten to put this kingdom to the sword. So he's like, yeah, we'll stop. We'll give up. We'll go hide out in this one little town and leave y'all alone. But otherwise, may both nations undefeated under equal law march together, shall bestow the gods and their sacred rights. My father-in-law Latinus will retain his armies my father-in-law, is powerful, his rightful rule. The men of Troy will erect a city for me. Lavinia will give its walls her name. So he's like, yeah, if I win, we'll be nice, but I will marry your daughter, and it'll be cool. Okay, this is like the second to last one. Eternia turns into a Rutulian, and she sneaks into, like, the duel is about to happen. It's revving up, and the armies are gonna like watch it, very much like book 4, or I guess that starts in book 3, and then something happens to that setup in book 4 that is similar to this. Um, and then yeah, so Eternia, like, she disguises herself as a Rutulian, and she gets into the crowd and she starts like riling them up, and she's like, "Are you guys just gonna stand by and see Turnus potentially get beat by Aeneid or Aeneas? We got to do something about that." And yeah, this is just straight up book 3 and book 4 homage. And this was, if you recall, after that duel, there was going to be some pact, where the winner was going to claim Helen, basically. But Athena gets this Trojan Pandarus, who I think has shown up. I think he's like in this poem, but I kind of forgot about him. She gets him to shoot Menelaus, and then they all start fighting again. So that's basically what happens again. And Juturnia even gets like an illusion to happen in the minds of the Rutulians of an eagle flying over the battlefield. So yeah, that's just straight up Iliad. Once again, this poem's kind of wild in that it's almost like an ad lib where he's just like putting in Homeric homages while making it about Italy instead of Troy and Greece. All right, guys, we're basically done. But today's quiz is not a normal quiz. I need you to give me 3 to 5 sentences, or maybe a little more, on how you feel about all of the notes I gave at the beginning of the video. So you're going to need to pick one of 2 sides. Do you think that Aeneid is completely pro-Roman, and that it's actually just kind of what it seems like it is on the surface? On the surface level, it's just basically propaganda. It's poetic propaganda that is pro-Augustus. Or do you think it is actually critical of Rome? It is kind of like pointing out these flaws in the way Rome goes about conquering the entire Eurasian landscape, and there's so much violence that has occurred for Rome to be where it is at this point. So yeah, you can pick one of those 2. I don't think there could be a third option. If you want to be complicated about it, you could probably try to say like it's maybe a little bit of both, but I'll leave that up to you. And the only requirement is that you need to use at least one specific example, and that can either be like from the actual poem's plot, or it can kind of be from our notes, or both at the same time, sort of. Yeah, so try to have fun with this and like actually like really tell me how you really feel. As long as you hit the requirements of 3 to 5 sentences and use some kind of example, and it's not super like hastily written. Like, as long as, like, if it's grammatically good and it seems like you put a little bit of time in it, you're gonna get your points. But do spend a good, I don't know, 10 30 minutes on it, 10 to 30 minutes on it, and then I'll share those on Monday, so that'll be exciting. I want to see how you guys feel, and then we'll talk more about, we'll go more in depth on Monday, somewhat based on how what y'all are thinking. All right, last thing. The poll about when a meeting should happen. So 11 and 12 o'clock won, and only one of you has the thing. So I was thinking maybe 11:30 would be the perfect compromise, and that would be Wednesday. I will tell you by Monday if we're gonna try to do this. So I would probably stand in for a video, and you would just kind of show up to this, and we would read, I think, like almost exactly the last. Yeah, at school today. Okay, so we would read like the last 10 pages. I know some of you guys aren't like a huge fan of reading aloud, but I don't know. It seems like we should try to like finish the poem together, since we've been reading it for months now. And it'll be a test run for Julius Caesar, the play that we're finishing with. Because clearly we should at least do that for at least one part of Julius Caesar. Have you guys pick roles. Somebody could be Julius Caesar, someone could be Brutus, someone could be Cassius, etc. And we can do that sometime in May, at least for the part of Julius Caesar that is the big Ides of March scene. Could be kind of fun. Also, keep in mind that last reading, Julius Caesar, You can read Shakespeare plays in a single sitting. Like you read them at about 2 hours, and yeah, they can be dense and kind of hard to follow. But I'll try to find a good online version that has footnotes to clear up some of the crazy, flowery Elizabethan language. Um, and it'll at least be more legible than Oedipus Rex. I can guarantee that. That Oedipus Rex translation was rough. Shakespeare is usually a little easier to grasp than that. Anyway, I think that'd be fun. All right, guys, it's a bit long-winded. So I will talk to you on Monday, and good luck with the response. Thank you.